Before we begin our unit on factoring, there is a topic that is often overlooked in most algebra classes because it comes at the end of the textbook, so oftentimes the teacher doesn't get to it. And that's dealing with this topic of the greatest common factor. For a lot of what we're going to be doing in this unit, it's very, very important for us to know how to find the greatest common factor. So this is a prerequisite in order for us to be successful in this unit. So let's talk about this, the greatest common factor. What is it? Well, the technical definition of a greatest common factor is it's the highest number that divides evenly into two or more numbers. For example, if we're asked to find the greatest common factor, by the way, greatest common factor is usually abbreviated GCF, which you can see is pretty obvious why that would be. But if we're asked to find the GCF, or the greatest common factor of 16 and 12, the traditional way to look at it would be to say, well, let's look at the factors of 16. Factors are numbers that multiply together to give you this value of 16, like 1 and 16, and 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. And there's no other factors, so these are the factors of 16, 1, 2, 4, and 8, 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16. Now we do the same thing for 12. We would list the factors of that. Well, the factors of 12 would be 1 and 12. We would have 2 and 6, and we would have 3 and 4. Now the common factors would be they both have a 1 in common, they both have a 2 in common, they both have a 4 in common. But those are the only common factors. So the greatest common factor is going to be the largest factor that they have in common, which in this case is the 4's. So our GCF here, our greatest common factor, would be 4. Another way to look at it, and this is the way I like to look at it, as opposed to having to list these all out every time, is the greatest common factor is going to be the largest number that divides evenly into these numbers. So it does involve some thinking, but when you think about it, the largest number that goes evenly into 4 and 6, or that goes into 16 and 12, is going to be 4. Because 6 goes in 12, but 6 isn't a factor of 16. 8's a factor of 16. 8 divides evenly into 16, but it doesn't divide evenly into 12. So the largest number that divides evenly into both of these is going to be 4. Now this is advanced algebra, so we don't see any variables yet. So what happens if there are variables? So let's say if we're asked to find the greatest common factor now of 16x squared y and 12xy squared. Well, we just focused on the 16 and the 12, so we know between these two that the greatest common factor for the coefficients there is going to be 4. For the variables, it's really easy. You look to see what's the largest when we look at the x's, for example, they both have an x in common. So I want to find between those x's which is the largest one. Or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. What's the largest x they both have in common? So this has an x squared, this has an x. So the largest variable they both have in common as far as the x's are concerned is just a plain old x. If I look at the y's here, this one has a y, this one has a y squared. The largest that they both have in common is just a plain old y. So the greatest common factor between 16x squared y and 12xy squared would be 4xy. Let's look at some other ones. Let's do this first one together, and I'll have you try the other two on your own. So what's the greatest common factor between 8x cubed y squared and 16x squared y to the 4th? Well, let's start with the coefficients, the 8 and the 16. What's the largest number that divides evenly into both 8 and 16? Did you think of it? It's going to be 8. 8 goes into both 8 and 16 evenly, so 8 is your greatest common factor. For the coefficients at least. Now let's look at the variables. Let's start with the x's. They both have an x. Now what's the largest x they both have in common? Well, this one has an x squared. The other one has an x cubed. So x squared is the largest one they both have in common. Let's look at the y's. This one has a y squared. The second one has y to the 4th. The largest they both have in common would be y squared. So the greatest common factor between these two would be 8x squared y squared. Now I want you guys to pause the video, and I want you to take a minute and see if you can figure out the greatest common factor between these two terms. Now the last one is a tricky one. Now this is a situation where we have 3 terms, and I want you to find the greatest common factor between those 3 terms. So pause the video and hit play when you're ready to check your answers. Okay, let's see how you did here. So we're trying to find the largest number that divides evenly into these two terms. Now, starting with the coefficients 4 and 18. Now, just because they're both even doesn't mean that 4 is a factor for both of them, because 4 does not divide even to 18 evenly. So that means that 2 would be the largest common factor, because 2 goes into 4, and 2 also goes into 18. So my greatest common factor, at least for the coefficients, is going to be 2. Let's look at the a's. The largest a's that they both have in common would be just this plain old a here. Looking at the b's, the largest b that they both have in common would be the b squared. Look at the c's. Oh, did I catch you there? There's only one c, the second term there, that doesn't have a c. So the greatest common factor would just be the 2ab squared. Let's look at the last one. The last one has 3 terms here, so you're going to look at all 3 of them. So for the coefficients, the 10, the 12, and the 20, you're looking there, what's the largest number that would divide into all 3 of those evenly? Now between 12 and 20, 4 goes into both of those evenly, but 4 doesn't go into 10 evenly. So 4 is not our greatest common factor. 5 goes into 10, and 5 goes into 20, but 5 doesn't go into 12, so that's not a greatest common factor. In this case here, you should have got your greatest common factor is also going to be, like the previous one, just 2, because 2 is the largest number that goes into 10, 12, and 20 evenly. Now let's look at your variables. The first one has an r squared, the second one is r to the 4th, the last one is r cubed. The largest one that all 3 have in common would be the r squared. Looking at the s's, here we have s to the 5th, s cubed, and s to the 6th. The largest s that they all have in common is s cubed. And lastly, with the t's, the largest t, we have t cubed, t to the 4th, and t. The largest t that they have in common is just a plain old t. So the greatest common factor that you should have gotten would be the 2r squared s cubed times t. So hopefully this gives you a better idea and a better understanding of how to find the greatest common factor, because this is always going to be your first step when we're going to factor a polynomial. So good luck as you're trying to do that.